Hey, welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. We have back with us one of our favourite authors, the one and only Victoria V.E. Schwab. How are you, Victoria?
Doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Oh, mate, it's so wonderful to see you again. Not only is it wonderful to see you again, but it's wonderful to see the incredibly positive reaction to a book we're all very proud of, your latest novel, Gallant. You must be so pleased.
I am. There's always an immense relief that comes with a book's release because when you're writing a book, when you're crafting it, you're holding it aloft. You're kind of holding it and keeping it safe and making sure nothing is forgotten, making sure it's preserved. And then when you get to hand it to other people and say, now you take care of this, now you remember this, it's just, I always feel like I can finally just like set a weight down.
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. And of course, being an author, it's like a lot of people who work in the media, we always work ahead of ourselves to such a
Exactly.
pronounced degree. So you're here talking about Gallant while you're in the middle of writing your next
I
novel, no
know.
doubt. And I think there's a lot of temporal issues with that about directing your headspace from one place
Oh,
to another.
you're never living in the present. Like I work 2 years in the future and I promote 2 years into the past. So I feel
Yeah.
like I never know when it is.
I really absolutely feel that. And we're here, of course, to talk about Gallant, which is available in a number of editions from Forbidden Planet, including that beautiful signed exclusive sprayed edge edition that you've done for us, which is absolutely wonderful.
Beautiful.
Such a beautiful cover as well. But what can you tell? What can you tell me about Gallant?
I mean, so we talked about this a little bit last time. I feel like I can go into a tiny bit more
Yeah,
detail now that I called it an underworld story. And really it was inspired by this idea. And I know it definitely like harkens visually to something like Stranger Things, the idea of the upside down. And so when I created Gallant, the location, the house, I spent a lot of time wondering what was on the other side of the wall. And I tried making it a fairy tale. I tried making it a forest. I tried making it a wild space. And then I remember one day I was like, oh no, it's the same space. Like it has to be a mirror world. It has to be the house. If the house is this important to character on our side of the wall, then there must be a version of the house on the other side of the wall. And so that's why, and you see the covers, you'll see the two houses, and it's quite literal. I think people always assume that it will just be metaphorical, but it's like, haha, for once, it's literal. And of course, with the other house comes another master, comes another person who lives in the house. And so we have the master of the house and a figure that was one of my favorite to write, and also a character that I think is one of the reasons that it doesn't sit cleanly into any genre. I think there's a version of this story where the master of the house takes the shape of like a teenage boy, and that is the YA novel version of it, the love interest to be on the wall. Instead, the master of the house is in many ways a parental figure. It is an ominous parental figure, but it is something that is far less comfortably seated in one genre, if you will. Much more, I think, kind of Miyazaki, a little like figure that can't be defined in age and appearance. And he was probably my very like favorite part of writing it was the image of pieces of skin missing and being able to see where the bones have been taken out was one of the first visuals I had for him.
that's an incredibly lush description. I think it's very appropriate that you reference Miyazaki, who's clearly been a great influence upon you, creatively speaking.
Absolutely, absolutely. From Howl's Moving Castle, I mean, honestly, everything that he's done. But I think something that Howl's is my favorite, and I probably watch it like once every couple of months, which is why it's always the first one to come to mind. But thing I love is I think Miyazaki, like Neil Gaiman, these are authors who, these are creators who play with the threshold, who play with the idea of like space and the delineation of space and the liminal spaces. I think that I've always been attracted to imagery and ideas that play with that whispering space between the shout and the silence.
Yeah. I know, absolutely. I get that. We were talking the last time you were on about, your sense of space, and it's like that that glorious Neil Gaiman story. The first thing I became really aware of what you're talking about is that Neil Gaiman story referencing the fact that cities were in fact sentient and were asleep,
Yes.
and it's that whole question of what happens when they wake up. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that feels very much like these themes that come out in your work.
Yeah.
That space in between.
I think it's the ambiguity, right? I like to play in the things that are not concrete, are not like easily defined. I think it's the same reason I never think of myself as a horror writer, but then you see something like Gallant, which definitely has elements of horror. And I think it's the parts of horror that I like are the quiet parts, the parts that make you sit in silence or sit with space, or it's the lonely parts, right? I think that horror has a way as a genre of really exploring our mental landscape, our interior space. And those are the things that really excite me as a storyteller.
I can see why. I think the things that we fear as human beings, and it's different for everybody, are also fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's like an empty house. I mean, an empty house is an image that repeats in this book a lot. An empty house can be potential, but it can also be loneliness. It can be death. It can be grief. It can be family. Like empty houses as motifs, yes, it can be like obviously a very popular setting for a horror novel, but it also can just be sadness. It can just be, in the case of Gallant, a house that is slowly falling into disrepair, in two different ways. One rapidly disintegrating, and one more a sense of neglect because this family is dying out.
Yeah, that's very interesting. How long did it take you to write this novel, Victoria?
I never know how to measure because there's like when I get the idea and when I turn the book in, and then there's when I'm actually drafting. And I never like to measure writing as when I'm actually drafting because I'm thinking about it, I'm working on it. I wrote the outline and tore the outline down for Gallant 4 or 5 times as I was trying to figure out exactly what kind of story I was telling. But once I got the ending, I never start writing a book. I know we've talked about this before, that I never start writing a book until I know the ending. And the last page of Gallant at the piano, that moment at the piano, that I had that. Once I got that, it took me about 5 months to write the book.
I mean, I think this is a fascinating thing about your process
Yeah.
that's really quite different to many of the people I speak to, but it's the concrete nature of having that ending and then working back
Yeah.
from it is just so interesting to me.
It's the thing that I'm working toward. It gets a little bit more ambiguous in something like what I'm writing now, which is Threads of Power, which is the next arc in Shades of Magic. Knowing that that's 3 books, it's like I'll usually have like 4 or 5 potential endings, and it's more just like an ordering issue. But I need to know really with a standalone novel like Addie or like Gallant, that last punctuation mark, that last moment, because it becomes really a summation of everything I'm trying to accomplish over the course of the book. The final page of Gallant is hopefully in retrospect something that we are leading to the entire time. It should feel like a not just a payoff, but like the actual sum of its parts coming together.
Yeah. I think that's a lovely way of looking at it. I think one of the remarkable things about your talent as an author is the fact that, for want of a better description, you can code switch so easily between series novels, which work beautifully, but these standalone novels, that these are really exquisitely formed pieces of narrative, and you can do both at the same time. I've often seen authors that I know struggle to flip between those things, but I think you do it so easily.
I
Do you,
love them.
yeah, I was
It's the
going to,
difference between salty and sweet. You know, when you're having
yeah,
like something really sweet and you start craving salty. So you
yeah.
go and you eat something salty and then you crave something sweet again. Like to me, it's just a palate cleanser. Like something working on Shades of Magic and Threads of Power, there's such long experiences as a writer. Like I've been working on Threads of Power for the last year, and I'm
Yeah.
like basically 150,000 words into the first book. It's not over yet, and that's unusual for me. But like, it's such a long process, and a standalone is it's all relative, but a more immediate form of gratification, a sense of closure. Whereas with Threads, it'll be 4 or 5 years of work to have that sense of closure for the trilogy.
Yes. No, of course, of course. That delayed satisfaction,
You know?
which is never quite coming, and that's what it's like. Work. You've also dipped your toe into comics, and that's very much like it is in the comics world. I mean, at least in comics, you're adapting your work with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yep.
But I imagine, as much fun as it might be to write Batman or Spider-Man, you're on this never-ending narrative that never
True.
really comes to an end, right?
True. It's true. Those are more like adventures, like
Yeah.
episodic adventures. And I feel like I need some form of closure to, like, again, talking about the fact that when I hand the book off to readers, I'm setting that weight down.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just really want to set that weight down.
I imagine it must be a wonderful feeling to essentially, like well-known musicians, when they complete a body of work. Think about completing a novel, like completing an LP, as they used to back in the day. Is you're essentially giving that novel to your readers at that point, and it becomes theirs as well as yours. There must be that must be a beautiful moment.
It's beautiful and it's terrifying because, of course, because like there's no guarantee people will like it.
Yeah.
But you have to, I think, 22 books in now, basically, I think you just learn that, like, it's not my job to make sure that everybody likes it. It's my job to do the absolute best at what I'm trying to do, and then trust that the people for whom that novel will be important will find it. Because the thing about being not like, I look at my favorite writers and I don't love all their work uniformly. I have things which speak to me on much more personal levels and things which I can appreciate. And so I think when you write as many books as I do, I think you have to let go of the idea that everybody will love everything. And you have to ask yourself really consciously, what am I trying to achieve with this book? And I think it becomes easier when you start receiving notes from readers that are like, this is the book I needed, or I saw myself in this. Because once you find the people who are at the center of the spotlight, it's really easy to let go of the rest. And someone for whom was like, this wasn't my favorite, or this didn't speak to me, that's great. There are millions of books out there that will speak to them. You're just trying to catch the ones who it is just right for.
I think that's very well said, and I think that moves nicely into us wrapping up this conversation, and perhaps with one final thing, which would be, if somebody's thinking of dipping their toe into your work and hasn't done before, if somebody is very familiar with your work, what would you say about Gallant? Why would Gallant be a great jumping off point?
You can read it in an afternoon. It's like, it's meant to be ephemeral and kind of bite size. I think that it captures a lot of the poetics of something like Addie LaRue. I'm very proud of the way that it's written, but I think it also captures the eeriness of The Archived, which is one of my earlier books, and the magic. I had a reader said recently that it had the adventure of my middle grade and the angst of my YA and the poetry of my adult. I think it's a good indicator. I don't know. I think it will really appeal to readers at all along the spectrum of my work.
I think that's such a wonderful way to put it, because I think it's like, while it has complete authorial integrity, but it's also this brilliant sampler for the things that you are particularly good at.
Yes, it's sampling. It's me sampling
Yeah.
all of my stuff into one story. Yeah, I hope so. I don't know. I hope, and then I just hope that it finds the readers that are looking for it.
I know it will, and I know that anybody watching this conversation who's been intrigued enough to buy the book will have a wonderful time with it. You should be very proud of it, mate. And I know everybody at Titan Books is very proud to be involved with it.
Thank you so much.
And it's so lovely to see you. And I hope everything goes well with your next arcs of the Shades of Magic. And I look forward to seeing you again, mate.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, always good to see you, Victoria. You take care of yourself. Cheerio. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.